So let's see, 2 weeks ago, I was headed for some big things that were going to happen. Number one, I'm blessed to have a wonderful daughter who shares her abundance and her success with me. And whenever there's a big opera that I really want to see, she imports me to New York to see. This time it was Turandot and, oh, I forgot the other one. Turandot was the big one I really wanted to see because it takes place in ancient China, and the sets are done by Franco Zeffirelli, who was a famous designer of stage sets and everything back in the 70s and 80s, and it's extremely opulent and over the top, and the costumes, amazing. And then on top of that, a week later, last weekend, was my granddaughter's mega wedding. Weddings are just, it's amazing, all the things that they do with weddings nowadays. Although on one hand it was very simple and beautiful and meaningful, but mega. So I was all excited about these things. And as it happened, about a couple of days before I was supposed to, well, let's see, it was about a week or so before I was supposed to leave for New York. I was motivating myself to do my exercises. And anybody who's been around me knows that that's always, I'm always looking for ways to keep on do those exercises in the morning. Because it's good for you, even if you're only 39 years old. So, I'm doing my exercises, and this time, I got this bright idea from God. The bright idea was, why don't you try putting on your headphones and putting on AC/DC,
Oh my goodness.
which is a mega heavy metal band. And I put on Thunderstruck, and I am doing my exercises to the point that I popped a tendon in my knee. And it started out just as a gentle, it's just like, I thought I strained it, and then about a couple days later, all of a sudden, the whole thing popped. And it's the kind of thing where you just see stars. I mean, it's like somebody took a huge hammer to your knee. It was unbelievable. So I had to, all of a sudden, I was back to using my rolling walker that I used when I had hip surgery. I mean, I could not put any weight on it. And what was going to happen? Because I wanted to go to New York. So I thought, whenever anything really, how to say, unique or interesting or bad happens, my reaction is, ooh, this will make a great church talk. So, that's the way I was raised. We used to be sailors. We used to spend the whole summer sailing up off the coast of Nova Scotia, actually racing, which my dad was an Episcopalian minister, but when he got on a boat, that identity vanished. And it was all about just beating the heck out of everybody else and finishing on the finishing line first. But sometimes there were terrible storms. Sometimes we got lost in the fog. Sometimes somebody's spar hit a halyard on our boat and something would pop or whatever. And our reaction was always, boy, this is going to make a great story. So that's one way of handling life's disappointments. Just think, like, what a great story it's going to make. All right. So I thought that I would just talk a little bit about how we handle life's interruptions from a spiritual point of view. And I think one of the first things is to recognize the role that the ego plays in these things. In fact, if you want to take a measurement of how far along you have come spiritually, I think one of the signs is that you start to be able to catch yourself in the act. You start to catch your ego in the act. Because when this injury happened, my ego's first reaction to anybody who inquired about my injury was, it's a sports injury. It is not an old lady injury. I am not going to I caught myself. You know, when you catch your ego doing its story, I thought, oh, there goes my ego. It wants to make sure that everybody has the right picture of me the way I want to be seen, not as a little old lady, but as this other creature. So, one of the things, when things don't go our own way, one of the things to just take a look at when we react to these things is where are we reacting from? And of course, being a human being, even though I'm spiritual, having this human experience, my first reaction was strictly from the ego. I didn't want anybody to see me as being disabled. Heaven forbids. And so I told everybody, be sure to make sure you know, this is a sports injury. It's not a little old lady falling, you can't get up. But the thing is, when we are able to let go of ego, that's probably the first step to discovering creative ways to deal with the injury or with the thing that didn't go the way we wanted it to go. So one of the first steps I think that really is important is to recognize anywhere in life where your ego is getting in the way, where you'd rather be right than have peace. So, one of the things that I recognized was that I needed to sort of let go of that and just open myself up to what are the possibilities, because I really wanted to go see this opera. And one of the obstacles was that my daughter likes to take the subway because she's a New Yorker. In fact, nobody in her family knows, except, well, she knows how to drive a car, but none of her kids even care about driving a car or getting a license, because in New York you just get on the subway. But I knew, hobbling down all these stairs into the subway, hobbling back up, and then when you get to the Met, it's a huge, massive plaza in front of Lincoln Center that you have to hobble across, or walk across if you're able. But it was going to definitely be a serious challenge for me. So once I recognized what the situation was, and I sort of got my ego out of the way, then I could open myself up to possibility. And I think this is where we sort of trip up on ourselves, because we want God to come in and fix everything for us, but we don't open ourselves up to, well, what are some possibilities for this? Instead of just going down the hill saying, oh, poor me, I'm a victim and I can't, what am I going to do? Eat some worms. I had to, open myself up to receiving some other kinds of information. And sure enough, a great idea occurred to me. I actually reached out and asked for help. I called up the Met and I said, I'm not a disabled person. But I do have a sports injury. And I want to go to see Turandot, and I want to go see this other opera. It was like 2 operas within 3 days. But I'm very concerned, because even if we had a limo and dropped off, I'd still have to walk all the way across this, and it'd be really uncomfortable. And they were so helpful. And I found out that there's a secret entrance down by the stage entrance, and that anybody can come and drop a passenger off there. And there's only like 50 steps to an elevator that takes you exactly to the level that you're going to go to see the opera. And as long as I was all wrapped up and feeling sorry for myself and angry that things didn't go and worrying that I would miss the whole trip because I really couldn't do the subway, all of a sudden this other option opened up. And it also gave my daughter, how would I say, the ability or the perspective to see that even if she had to drive her car to take me to the opera, all she had to do was block me off, and she has her favorite parking place. She could do it even though she really prefers to use the subway. So the first thing that I have to say about when things don't go your way is, number one, just recognize when your ego is getting in the way. And simply by recognizing that, I think it's sort of the first step to opening up to other possibilities. Because as soon as we're saying, well, I'm going to handle this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to look for everything that I can think, we are going to eventually get to the point where we've done all we can do, and we really have to just open up to whatever the universe, whatever spirit has in store for us as far as other possibilities. I think creativity starts at the point where we're willing to give up our ego. So that was one of the first lessons that I learned from this experience. The second thing is about progress. I talk a lot about progress and seeking comfort when I'm teaching my classes for older adults. Because as older adults, we tend to want to seek comfort all the time. And yet progress comes from the moment. If you go to physical therapy, believe me, it is not about comfort. Anybody who's had to go through physical therapy, anybody who's had to recover from surgery, the healing starts where the comfort stops. And it's the same thing with just life in general. When we are comfortable, we're not looking for answers. The possibility for growth isn't there. Quite frankly, it's the discomfort that opens us up to new possibilities. Even as hard as that sometimes that lesson is to take for us as human beings, when things don't go our way, it often is the place where life cracks open for new possibilities. So we have to at least be willing to try, because if we stick with comfort all the time, what happens is we surround ourselves, it's like surrounding ourselves with cotton. More and more comfort, and then more we retreat from life. We retreat from being alive. To be alive is to be interactive with life in all of its goodness and all of its ugliness and the good and the bad, everything in between. So progress, when you're dealing with things that don't go right, often has to do with at least being willing to try some new things. At least be willing to try. And for me, getting over this injury, one of the biggest difficulties was dealing with pain. I figured out how to get to the opera and all of that. The next thing that came up was my granddaughter's wedding, which was last Saturday. I then, after this one injury, I then came down with a sinus infection, a mega sinus infection, to the point where I wasn't getting any sleep, because as soon as you fall asleep, you start coughing and then you're awake and so on and so forth. Even my kitty wouldn't sleep with me. That's how bad it was. She retreated. Get me out of this. So, being willing to try. The more we are in comfort, the more we sort of envelop ourselves in this cotton blanket of, I don't know, we're comfortable, but we're not really living. So being willing to try. So every day when I would get up, and I was still dealing with the knee injury, and then the other one, it was just be willing to try. All right, today I'm going to be willing to try to walk a few steps without using the walker. And then the next, about a couple days later, now I'm going to try to switch over to just using a cane. And I did, now let's try just taking a couple steps on our own. And then it was, now let's try just taking one step on the stairway and see how it goes. Slowly but surely. And I think sometimes that's what we have to, we've got to push ourselves a little bit. And it doesn't have to be big. I think a lot of times, especially if you look at this from the point of view of science, our brain freezes whenever it perceives a possibility of a negative outcome or an uncertain outcome. And that's the place where we really need to, where our self-talk, how we speak to ourselves, is important. And as spiritual beings, that self-talk is even more important. So it means instead of just pulling back from everything, it means giving little things a little try. It can be just a tiny one step. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But when we take those little tiny try-these steps, that's where we start building our confidence back up. That's where we start getting our energy back up. So taking little tiny steps is a place where we can start with be willing to try, at least, instead of just seeking comfort. There was a very interesting piece of neurological information that I came back over in the last, 2 or 3 weeks. I was teaching a class, and they were talking about reducing your chances of dementia. And when people keep talking, exercise and take vitamin C and do all these things. This was an interesting one. There was a study where they were showing that people who cook for themselves every day have a 37% less reduced chance of dementia. So if you love to cook, that's a really great exercise. It's a mental exercise. And what they said is people who cook and who don't like to cook, but they cook, it increases by 67%. In other words, your ability, how do I say, you're reducing your risk, I have it turned upside down. You're reducing your risk by 67%, especially if you don't like to cook, but you're cooking. Because it takes measuring, it takes planning, it takes strategy. You have to figure out, when am I going to start? When do I want to put it in the oven? You know, and so on and so forth, and getting all these things ready. So, cooking. You want to keep young and youthful? Start cooking. And be willing to at least try. That's the thing, is to be willing to try new things. A lot of times we'll just, you know, put up our arms and say, oh, I can't try this new thing, I can't do this, instead of opening ourselves up. If we're spiritual beings, we're looking for support from Spirit. God. God can only do for us what God can do through us. I mean, that's such a simple thing, but it's true. So we have to open ourselves up to at least trying new things instead of resisting. And I think then the other thing is to realize when things don't go our way, like we think they should, that healing itself comes in many different forms. I think we tend to think of healing, and you can hear it sometimes in our prayer requests. You know, please pray for so-and-so because they have this condition. Please pray for so-and-so because they have that condition. And we spend a lot of time focusing on the condition because, you know, our heart's going out to that person and we're seeing that that condition is causing a lot of difficulties for the person. But when we focus on that, we are simply putting more of our spiritual nature and our spiritual energy into that situation. So instead, what we need to do is to look at healing and be willing to admit that healing comes in many different forms. And who are we to say what form that healing is going to be? So, a broader definition is sometimes healing is greater compassion. Sometimes healing is having deeper faith after we get through a situation that's really difficult. Sometimes it's renewing relationships. Sometimes after we go through a difficult time, we come away with clearer priorities or a softer heart. In fact, I made a whole list that I'm going to, I want to make sure this doesn't fall. Okay, it doesn't. I made a whole list for a discussion group today because there's all kinds of wonderful things that we can send to people besides just get better or just, you know, make everything well again. For emotional strength, we can send people peace, calm, courage, faith, trust, hope, resilience, patience, acceptance. For physical healing, we can send people vitality, wholeness, balance, harmony, restoration, comfort, ease, renewed energy. For spiritual support, we can send love, my favorite word, grace, companionship, divine guidance, presence, surrender, connection. For transitions or for difficulties, difficult situations that people are facing, we can send flexibility, openness, confidence, trust in the process, self-compassion, new perspectives, faith in unseen possibilities, instead of just focusing on what that situation is that's causing the difficulty. You get what I'm saying? We can send divine resources to that person instead of just focusing on them returning to health. Because that's more of a generalization, and in our brains, the way they were constructed, the more we generalize about things, the less energy we are putting out into the universe. Does that make sense? In other words, the more specific we are, the more we can send something that is a real strength and a real asset to somebody instead of just focusing on whatever the discomfort is that they're experiencing. So, when things don't go our way, probably our first reaction is often resistance, just like mine was. Yet these moments can be about life's greatest teachers. For me, I think the thing that I came away with, that was the best perception from both of these incidents, first the cracking my knee and then coming down with the infection, I managed to get to the day before, I did not think I would make it to the wedding because I was so sick. What got me through both of those situations was this willingness to try. So I said, I will just go and I'll just stay for the wedding ceremony. I don't have to go through I don't have to stay for the reception, but at least I'll be there for what's the most important thing. And once I got there, I thought, I got here. I guess I could stay and have a cocktail. And I don't have to talk to everybody. I can just smile and enjoy. And then I thought, well, I'm already here. I might as well stay for the dinner. Now, I have to admit, I did not stay for the after party. By then, I was ready to be Ubered home. Maybe it was too many cocktails, who knows. But I was willing to try. I was willing to try. And I was willing to get my ego out of the way and open myself up to other possibilities. And I think those are two of the things that can really help us, especially if we see ourselves as spiritual beings, that we are supported by a divine presence that's behind all things. And when we let go and open ourselves up to that, we can make it through. And one last example of somehow keeping trying. Is there anybody else here besides me who stayed up late to watch the Knicks win the national championship, the baseball? You did. Wasn't it the most awesome game? On 2 games, it came down. This team was trailing by 29 and 30 points, okay? But they kept trying. And it got down to literally the last 5 seconds of the game, and they won by 1 point. 1 point. It was absolute. Talking about not giving up and keeping on trying. So I think that's the main message for today. Is be open and be willing to try and look for opportunities instead of focusing on the problems. So. May each of you know peace in the midst of uncertainty. May you feel strength when you feel weak. May wisdom guide your decisions. May patience soften your journey. And may love surround and sustain you. And may you trust in the unfolding of your highest good, knowing that beyond all appearances of distress, all is well. Thank you.